Sudden death among healthy working-age people worldwide is skyrocketing. Edward Dowd is an author of the new book, Cause Unknown.
If you don't think it's the vaccines, what is it and why aren't we talking about it? This is multi-system fraud, pharmaceutical fraud, regulatory fraud, media fraud, healthcare fraud. It's fraud across the board. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Do you want to talk about the excess deaths and the way that you track this and what the book is really about and cost to the economy? I think you had made it an estimated $147 billion in damage.
Here are the numbers we found in 2022. 300,000 excess deaths in the U.S., 1.36 million disabilities, 26.6 million injured people. That's presenting itself as chronically missing work. So that's about 10% of the U.S. population. That's why it's a national security issue. And we got an estimate for the injured from the Pfizer clinical trial data. We were searching for how does it manifest. And when we found the absence in work time loss, that's when we said, aha. And that's when we married those two together.
Yeah, I guess if you look at the damage numbers you're talking about, then the big damage came from the vaccine, right?
If these numbers were highlighted by all the news organizations, people would be running around like chickens with their heads cut off, but now there's silence on these numbers. These are pandemic numbers.
You can't argue. I mean, it's just data, and the data is overwhelmingly telling you from many different angles that something happened in 21 and 22.
We are in a pandemic. I call it the vaccinated. This kind of silence and this cover-up is going to cause more damage. It's going to be very interesting the next 10 years, and I do think there's a renaissance on the other side, but between now and then, it's going to get pretty wild.
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Ed Dowd, the former hedge fund manager, whistleblower, and author. You spent most of your career on Wall Street, with 10 years as a managing director for BlackRock, the world's largest asset management firm, overseeing a $14 billion fund. Your book, Cause Unknown, The Epidemic of Sudden Deaths in 2021 and 2022, explores the sudden surge of deaths in working-age people that most significantly was not attributed to COVID-19. You believe that the unexpected and sudden deaths of so many young and healthy people constitutes a national security concern. You also assert we are beginning a deflationary cycle that will become a recession and lead to a global economic collapse. From here, you expect the rollout of a central bank digital currency. Last month, you became co-treasurer for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign to seek the Democratic nomination for president. Ed, welcome back to London Real.
Great to be here, Brian. Thanks for having me on again.
Great to have you here. I love it having you on because we can talk about so many different things. But first, I've got to ask you about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign. You know, I first met Robert when I had him on my show in May of 2020. I think he was the second guest I ever had on our Digital Freedom platform, which I had to create because we were getting censored by YouTube. And I walked into that episode telling Robert I was going to get my vaccine. And by the end of the episode, my scientific MIT-trained brain was thinking, wait a second, I need to really listen to this man and think long and hard about it. And I had an amazing conversation with Robert. We've had him on since. And quite frankly, it just kills me when I look at the mainstream media's portrayal of him, because anybody who's ever spent an hour talking to Robert can realize he is an incredible man, has a tremendous amount of integrity, a great vision. And so I was just really happy to see him running and to see you associated with his campaign. How's that been for you, and how did that happen?
Yeah, Bobby wrote the foreword to my book, and he was one of the people who, along with Gavin DeBecker and Tony Lyons of Sky Arts Publishing, they all kind of pitched the book to me. And they said it's important that I use my data and get my voice out there, because it was a different voice at the time. It was a Wall Street voice. It was a trend analysis voice. I didn't go into the science. I went into the body counting, ones and zeros, disabilities, ones and zeros, and now we have injuries, ones and zeros. So that was my contribution to this fight. I've got to know Bobby. I've done a couple speaking events with him for some of his former. Well, he's no longer with CHD, the nonprofit he founded, because he's running for president. But we did some events. Got to know him very well. He's a man, like you said, of integrity and honor and truth, and that's an emerging trend. I think it's a nascent trend, but it's going to explode. And I think all the leaders going forward are going to have to exhibit those characteristics, because the current clown show we have is full of gaslighting, lies, and deceit, and all the people that are currently occupying seats of power have to go, in my humble opinion, and hopefully peacefully.
What a crazy concept that our leaders have to embody truth and integrity, right?
Absolutely. And here's the thing about Bobby. So, when I joined the campaign, there was the first call. It was the exploratory committee before he decided to run, and I was tapped for that. So I was there early days, and he said on the call, there were some pollsters on the call, and he said, "Look, guys, I'm going to lead. A lot of candidates lead from behind with the polls. I'm going to speak the truth. I'm going to speak what I believe to be true. I'm not going to be poll driven." And when I heard that, that's when I was like, "This is going to be great." And so you can see from his public appearances, he's not holding any punches. He's not, testing something first to see if it's going to resonate with the public. He's just saying what he believes to be true. And again, one of the biggest parts of his platform is freedom first. And we have medical tyranny and lack of First Amendment rights in this country at the moment. And until we get those back, all the other issues you may or may not agree with Bobby on are kind of kicking around sand in the sandbox. Without those core tenets of medical autonomy and freedom of speech, we got nothing. So that's what we can all rally around. Get back to that. You get and he's very familiar with all the agencies. He's worked with them in his prior environmental law practices, and he knows how the bureaucracy works, and he knows how it's been perverted and corrupted. So he's the man for me, and I think he's the man for the nation.
Yeah, it's a breath of fresh air to see a candidate who speaks his truth, and it resonates in 10 seconds of listening to him. It's like, well, here's a guy who really is telling you what he really thinks. It's not some canned line. It hasn't been ironed out and gone through all the approvals of all these committees and fundraisers. It's like, he's telling you what he truly believes. It's, and it's noticeable for me. And I think for a lot of people too. I mean, he's got some great poll numbers, and depending on who you ask, I mean, I've heard behind the scenes that if you look at the real numbers, he's not actually far behind Biden, even though I think the official polls have him at 20%, which is still super strong for a candidate that just announced.
Yeah, what's interesting is the establishment press is starting to talk about the fact that Biden has a Kennedy problem, and that's a good thing. And it is a problem, and there's chatter amongst the oligarchic class that they have to figure out a way to get rid of Biden, get someone else in there soon, because if this is allowed to continue, Bobby has a very high chance of grabbing the nomination if they don't fix it. The establishment, that is, not us, obviously.
Can Bobby grab the nomination from a Democratic Party that won't even let Biden debate? Is that possible?
I think it's possible, and what's going on is guerrilla media. I mean, his message is getting out there. He was asked, does he care about the censorship, and he said no. There's a lot of independent voices. The trust in the media has never been so low. This COVID debacle, this vaccine debacle, has shattered the trust in many institutions. And personally, my social media metrics continue to accelerate, and that's not because of me per se, it's because of the information and message that I have, and people are finding me word of mouth, and it's spreading. I can sense a spreading acceleration of what the truth is getting out there. I mean, obviously, lives need to be saved, and I'd love for the people in charge to declare the truth. But if we have to spread it word of mouth, and so be it.
I did a search for him here in London on my Google in the news just to see who was covering him. And of course, The Guardian came up, one of the publications here in London, and it called Robert a conspiracy theorist anti-vaxxer, and then was just pulling out all this nonsense. And I was like, really? That's how you're going to cover this guy? And I don't know. Sometimes I continually to be shocked at what the mainstream media does, to things. It still surprises me after all these years.
Well, I put out a tweet a couple of weeks ago that we have a dearth of conspiracy theories. We're undersupplied because a lot of the ones we had have come true. So we need new ones. It's
so true. After we got done fighting YouTube in 2020 and we set up our Freedom platform, and on that platform I had, people like Bobby and a bunch of other doctors that were speaking the truth. After that, I ran to be mayor of London. So I spent 7 months in the spotlight with the mainstream media coming after me. So I know what it feels like to read a headline and you're reading about somebody that has your name, but it has not a single shred of truth in it. And it's like clickbait done to the extreme, and to see publication after publication after publication come out with that. So I know what it feels like, but I'm glad Bobby is confident that, like you said, the guerrilla media will get the message out to people. And yeah, him against Biden, you're right. They should really start to worry because it's night and day. And again, it's just, you couldn't make this stuff up. Biden takes a fall yesterday, and it's just like, they're still going to try to sell that to the public. And versus Bobby, it's just kind of hard to believe. But I guess potentially those are the two candidates, right?
Yeah. The Biden fall was interesting. People wanted me to, retweet that. And I'm at the point now where it's just sad, and I don't need to highlight an old man falling. What I think we should all do, collectively is shame folks who even try to pretend that this is okay. It's not, making fun of Biden is kind of passe. We should make fun of the people who actually try to gaslight us in our own discussions locally and with friends. If anybody at a cocktail party says to me anything about Biden that's remotely favorable, I'm good. You just shame them right then and there, and you just say, "Look, I can't take you seriously. This guy's not well. He's sick."
Yeah, I had similar feelings. Like, I don't like putting someone down, but then I also see that he's embodying some just terrible things to happen to the country. So yeah, I think your call is probably the better way to go there. And again, I've heard Bobby talk about this censorship industrial complex that he's dealing with. But this is probably the best thing that he could do for his quote unquote image, because they were able to pigeonhole him, kind of last year. And even though his book was like the bestseller in America, he didn't get any coverage. But it feels like with him running for president, now the media is having to address him somewhat. And I feel like people are really starting to see more of what he's about, which I think is good for everybody. So I was really happy to see you on board with that, and wishing you all the best. Let me know how we can help over here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Let's jump into a couple things because, you've been talking about what we're looking at here with this economy. And I'm just curious if your opinion has changed in the last couple months. I think the last time we were on talking, I think Silicon Valley Bank had just tanked. Now we've seen these inflation numbers seem to be revising to be potentially less catastrophic. But now we're also hearing rumors of recessions happening here in Britain and in America. Real estate prices seem to be dropping globally. You understand this because you worked on Wall Street, and like you said, you go by the numbers. What do you see happening in this economy in the last few months, and what should people really get their head around what's really happening here?
So in November of last year, we put out an economic report. My partners at Phinance Technologies calling for a recession in Q3 and Q4. As we've rolled through the first 6 months of this year, our early cycle indicators are telling us the recession will be as deep as the S&L crisis in the 90s economically. Again, what the financial assets do remains to be seen, but we suspect it'll be bad. And we just put out a report yesterday, an inflation update. We're now calling for deflation to rear its ugly head around Q1 of 2024. We're seeing a monetary supply credit contraction that's going to exacerbate the already weakening economic fundamentals. So we're looking for inflation numbers to come down hard. And we're thinking that's going to manifest itself in Q1 of 2024. So all this inflation talk is really rear view mirror. By the time we get to Q1 of 24, they'll be talking about deflation, and there'll be a policy response from the Fed and the powers that be. The Fed will probably go from QT, quantitative tightening, to QE. There'll be chatter at that time of a central bank digital currency, we suspect, and potentially a universal basic income, if it's as bad as we think this economic downturn could be. We don't know yet whether it's going to go systemic, meaning it causes the plumbing of the financial system to become unglued like the great financial crisis. But if that happens, Katie barred the door. I suspect this budget deal that we saw, I put out a tweet on this yesterday. Everyone's been confused by this debt ceiling deal. Speaker McCarthy seemed to surrender everything to the Democrats. He did a 2-year deal that's uncapped. So it's capped in time, but not price. So it gives the government the ability to spend $4 to $5 trillion. And everyone's confused. Everyone feels betrayed. I suspect if it isn't, blackmail or payola schemes for McCarthy, it's likely that he was informed of the coming economic downturn, and the government's going to need the ability to spend a ton of deficit spending into a recession. So I think it's a tell. It's a tell of how bad things are going to get going into the end of this year and into next year. And we have a problem. The U.S. government's going to start issuing bonds again. That's going to crowd out other investments. So we're going to see financial assets start to correct fairly shortly here. The stock market, technically, I don't want to get into it, but we're close to this stock market in the U.S. rolling over hard and catching up with the reality of the earnings of the companies in the S&P that are going to start going down, and there'll be layoffs coming. It's going to be very interesting in the second half of this year, especially into the fall.
And how can the Fed still be talking about raising rates at this point? How can they still be implying or threatening that they're going to go up another quarter in the near-term future when so many signs seem to be pointing out that this is really going to hurt when it goes the other way, like you said, more like Q1 next year?
Well, so when they were raising like jackrabbits the last year, they were unified. Now we're starting to see some dissent going on in the governor board, the Federal Reserve Board. We're starting to see some people say we should pause, we should take a moment to breathe. I think what the mistake they're making, especially Powell, is they're looking at the unemployment, which is artificially low. We think it's because the labor pool is smaller than they think. We've due to the vaccine injuries and the disabilities and the deaths, we think the labor pool is slightly smaller. So we figure the unemployment rate of 3.5% is really 2.7%. And 0.7% has been shaved off through the disabilities, deaths, and injuries. And the injuries manifest themselves in lost work time and lost work and absences, which went off the rails in 2022, 13 standard deviations above a 20-year trend, both in the U.S. and the UK. We just did the UK data, and they look exactly the same. So if you don't think it's the vaccines, what is it, and why aren't we talking about it? It's basically a bunch of people in the workforce who are chronically sick.
Yeah, let's actually just highlight that quickly, because from a data guy, when you see two different countries separated by an ocean that have a lot of fundamental differences, even though they're both G7, and you see a similar number of standard deviations like that, how does that make you feel?
Oh, I first of all, for those in the audience who don't understand what standard deviation is, it's a probability distribution curve, and a 3 standard deviation event is what we call a tail event, and it happens 0.03% of the time. And on Wall Street, that's a big deal. 3, just 3. All you need is 3, and guys on Wall Street start to worry. Well, this work absence and work time lost is 12 and 13 standard deviations in the UK and US in 2022. That's a black swan event. I mean, that just boggles the mind. This deviation from trend and happening in both countries simultaneously is a signal. And again, using deductive reasoning and simple logic, this trend started in 2021 and accelerated in 2022. So you have to ask yourself, what changed in 2021? Well, mass vaccination programs and mandates in the US. So unless someone has a better explanation, it needs to be investigated, but it doesn't seem to be even acknowledged or that statistic even being talked about by the governments. I mean, the numbers are just there in the US Bureau of Labor Statistics and the UK ONS data. It's just there.
And so while we're here, and for people that might not know the entire background, do you want to talk about the excess deaths and the way that you've tracked this and what the book is really about? And, the cost of the economy, I think you had made it an estimated $147 billion in damage, and just kind of those assertions, because I think those missing work numbers, they kind of roll off of that from your research.
Yeah, correct. So, the journey I began was just following some trends, and some of the earliest trends were excess deaths. They started showing up in the insurance company results in 2021, funeral home results, meaning funeral home companies were beating and raising earnings. And while the management teams were they were legitimately expecting after the first wave of COVID to go back to normal trend, but it didn't. And they started to become growth companies, which again, we should be asking ourselves, why are funeral home companies growth stocks again? So those two trends led me to other databases like the CDC, the Society of Actuaries. And what we found is there was a mix shift from old to young. So during 2020, there were excess deaths, but they're mostly old. It became established fact that COVID mostly affected older folks with comorbidities. Well, then suddenly in 2021, excess deaths took off, especially in the working population, more so than the general population. And that was proven in my book. And it's continued to this day. The Society of Actuaries just released their 2022 report, and young folks are continuing to die in their group life business in the millennial age group, 12% more than the general U.S. population. So again, whatever's happening is affecting the working folks in all countries across the Western nations. So that's something that needs to be investigated. It's not normal, and it's flipped. It's a relationship that it never held before. In fact, the Society of Actuaries had proven in a study in 2016, which I QR code in my book, that their business is a good business. They determined that group life policyholders die normally at 1/3 the rate of the general U.S. population in any given year. And that all flipped in 2021. There was an 8% differential, 40% excess deaths between 25 and 64 in group life versus 32% in the general U.S. population in 2021. So excess deaths have come down since then, but they're still high for the working folks, and that continues. We're running now between 15 and 20% excess deaths across all Western nations right now.
That's extremely high.
10% is a once in a 200-year flood, according to Scott Davison at One America. He said that in January of 2022. So statistically, 10% is crazy. That's 3 standard deviations. 40% is off the charts. That's what happened in 21. And 20% is an abomination. And unfortunately, the trend into 2023 doesn't seem to be normalizing yet. It's still running quite high, especially in group life. And group life for me is the smoking gun, because these are the people that work at the Fortune 500 mid-sized companies who are basically mandated.
Yeah, that was my next question. What do you expect to happen to those numbers in 23 in different places around the world? And is it going to be correlated to where the vaccine is still being promoted or even mandated?
I'm sure that's going to be part of our analysis. Our biggest fear is that we don't know the medium and long-term effects. And what concerned us when we produced the vaccine damage report, the number you referenced of about 150 billion in economic damages, what we saw that was disturbing was that the absence and work time lost accelerated into 2022. It became significantly worse. It was 6 standard deviations in 21 in both the UK and the US, and then it accelerated to 13 and 12 standard deviations. So we're concerned that even though you may not be getting boosters, there may be a certain segment of the population where damage has been done and your immune system's been compromised. So you're injured and you're chronically getting ill. And unfortunately, these buckets are not static. So you can go from injured to disabled, potentially dead. And here are the numbers we found in 2022. 300,000 excess deaths in the US due to we believe to the vaccine. We think that's low. We're very conservative. 1.36 million disabilities and 26.6 million injured people that's presenting itself as chronically missing work. So that's about 10% of the US population. That's why it's a national security issue, and it seems to be predominantly found in the working folks of this country, not those who are either retired or working for themselves who chose not to get the jab or quit to get the jab. We found those not in labor force in 2022 and 21, their disability rate went up the least, only 4% versus the employed disability rate, which went up 31%. So whatever happened in 21 and 22 was detrimental to your health to be employed. And obviously, the only thing that changed was the vaccine and mandates. And if it's not that, what is it and why is it not being talked about? And the circular logic takes you back to the fact that it's likely a cover-up at this point.
And when it's hitting the employed, that means it's hitting the people that are healthy enough to work?
Yes, work. So by the very nature of getting up in the morning and getting to a job and being young, you're the healthiest amongst us. You're between 25 and 44. We'll just use that group, the millennials. You're the healthiest amongst us. You have access to the best healthcare, but yet mysteriously in 21 and 22, your health outcomes as a group are worse than the general population. That should never happen, and it's a national security issue. That's what I've said to Senator Ron Johnson. In our military, I've talked to Teresa Long, Colonel Teresa Long, and she's one of the whistleblowers, and she suspects that if we don't fix all this, and given the problems they're having with recruitment due to the woke nature of the military, we won't have a standing army in 5 years, because what people don't understand is for every one pilot that flies a jet, there's 7 to 10 support people behind them. And if you get 2 of those people either dying, disabled, or chronically sick, you have a problem.
Those numbers are just hard to comprehend. 26 million injured. And like you said, it's one thing to look at the deaths, but if the injuries are harder to quantify, but if you're seeing the missing work going up, that's a great way to see it. But like you said, it's unknown. So that could go up in the next year, even if there's not people vaccinated, because you don't know the damage that's being done and how much it disabilitates someone before they even die, right? You just don't know.
We don't know. We don't know the medium-term effects. And, as a trend follower, we're looking at the disability trend. So the rate of change in the growth of disabilities has slowed, but the trend, if you're going to draw a trend line, it hasn't broken trend. So disabilities, if things were going to get back to normal, we should see a break in the trend, and we haven't yet. It's just the rise in disabilities has slowed, which is good news. But we also suspect that part of the issue is that some of those people who are disabled are dying. So the numbers are slowing potentially because of deaths.
I think I read a study that in Switzerland a few weeks ago that they're no longer suggesting the vaccine for children or able-bodied people, but they still are in other countries, maybe even the US. Like what is the status of how hard people are pushing the vaccine at this point?
So it's still mandated in many colleges across the country. First responders in hospitals and police departments and fire departments are still under mandates in certain areas of the country. There's still some corporations that are probably still pushing this. The good news is that booster uptake is way down, and the general populations of the globe are using common sense. They know it doesn't work, so why continue the insanity of doing something that doesn't work? And I'm happy about that. But again, the thing that I'm most concerned about are the medium to long-term effects. Has damage already been done? And the thing for me that really got me concerned was when we discovered the injured, which we got an estimate for the injured from the Pfizer clinical trial data. And that's why they wanted to hide it for 75 years, because that's our estimate. And again, so you have an estimate of injured, but then you ask yourself, well, we were searching for how does it manifest? And when we found the absence and work time lost, that's when we said, aha. And that's when we married those two together. And to give you an idea of the economic damage, we estimate 5.2 billion lost in wages from the dead, about 52 billion disabled, and 89 billion from lost work time from the injured. So the injured are causing the most economic damage. And there's also the productivity lost that we can't measure. We can only measure wages. What do I mean by productivity? Productivity is a multiplier of our economy. So the more productive we are, the more economic growth we have, and it's a multiplier effect. So since we can't measure that, our 150 billion estimate could be 500 billion, could be $1 trillion. We don't know. What we do know is when you're chronically ill, the other people that aren't ill have to pick up the slack, and they get burnt out, and they may get sick, not because of vaccine injury, just because they're overworked. They're not chugging along at full speed. And if you are at work and you're chronically ill, you may not be working at 100% capacity. You may be working at 75%, even when you do show up, maybe 50%. So there's lots of lost productivity. And, that's just showing up anecdotally all over the US, and especially in service industries where restaurants are closing early. Car repair shops aren't moving things through fast enough. So it's starting to slowly show up in the productivity of the economy.
Ed, is anybody in a higher place willing to have conversations? I mean, you mentioned the general, you mentioned the senator. Has any of that changed where people are willing to even discuss this with you? I mean, obviously having Robert out there is great because there's someone in a political party that's actually talking about this, but is anybody else engaging with you?
So I was told by some media people that they would put me in touch with Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's running the COVID investigation committees. And I became frustrated because no one reached out to me. And then Dr. Robert Malone recently said as much in a tweet. I retweeted it. Then he went on Steve Bannon's show and said, it's been crickets from the Congress that should be reaching out to Dr. Malone. He mentioned my name in the interview and said Ed Dowd and I have not been sought after for our expertise. So we're just curious as to why no one really wants to bring us to the Hill and testify, because as far as I'm concerned, there's a lot of people in all the countries of the globe who are getting sick, and they're going to their doctors, and and if you're not informed of what we are informed of, you go in and you have a symptom. So the doctor treats the symptom, but not the underlying cause, which we think is a compromised immune system. And there are all sorts of protocols being developed to detoxify the spike protein. So until we have a kind of a national global conversation about this, people are going to continue to treat the wrong things and not solve the underlying problem. That's what I'm most annoyed with, is that this kind of silence and this cover up is going to cause more damage.
Has anybody spoke to the government in the Congress or the Senate about this? I haven't seen any hearings. I haven't seen.
No. The COVID hearings have been focused on the Kabuki theater around the Wuhan lab and the wet markets. I mean, that for me, I don't care where the virus came from. All I know is we produced a product that seems to be killing, maiming, and disabling, untold amounts of people. So we don't need to know the origins of the virus. That seems like Kabuki theater to me and a distraction.
Yeah, I guess if you look at the damage numbers you're talking about, then the big damage came from the vaccine, right? Yeah, no. So I've said publicly on a number of podcasts that the numbers we're seeing now with the lost work time, the disabilities, and the deaths, we have pandemic numbers today. We are in a pandemic, I call it the vaccinated. And if these numbers were highlighted by all the news organizations like the deaths were in 2020 with the case count and the death count, people would be running around like chickens with their heads cut off because they, listen to the media.
but now there's silence on these numbers. These are pandemic numbers we're seeing. The WHO just said the pandemic's over a couple of weeks ago. Rochelle Walensky, the head of the CDC, resigned the same day. So there seems to be this, I like to use the Homer Simpson meme, Homer Simpson, backing into the hedgerow to disappear. It seems to me that that's what the global authorities hope will happen.
I'm having flashbacks here, Ed, because that same newspaper, The Guardian, that, described Bobby that way, were printing these numbers in 2020. And I mean, I just would wake up every day and they printed them, and it was like, terror porn. And they were just literally terrorizing the nation with these numbers after numbers after numbers that, what the hell did they mean at the end of the day? And it was this way of just constantly instilling fear in everyone about something that really was affecting a very tiny percentage of them. Meanwhile, I'm getting taken off the air. And I'm also, to add insult to injury, Ed, I'm having conversations with like the Great Barrington Declaration people and Bobby Kennedy and all these people that are speaking reason to me. And I see this complete disconnect with the media. And now, like you said, we seem to be seeing it completely the other way, where there's actually a real problem we need to focus on, and it's not being mentioned at all.
Oh, Jamie Foxx had some serious stroke brain injury. The insiders are now coming out and saying that it happened right after he took a shot for a movie he was filming. And people don't want to talk about it. I mean, this is crazy making at this point, and insanity. And they hope that this can go away, but it's not. And again, I can tell by the reception that I used to receive, where I was considered crazy, to thank you so much, is what I'm seeing now when I go out and about on the island of Maui. More and more people recognize me. I go to the beach. I'm not a celebrity, but people approach me on the beach. So, and my friends are like, wow, that's weird. I go, well, that's good news, because it means, there's an awakening going on. And, I did a little analysis of Maui deaths, just straight up deaths. I didn't analyze it, but every year since 2019, deaths on Maui have gone up while the population has decreased since 2019 by about 2%. I was on a radio show on the island of Kauai. A woman who runs that radio show, Felicia Caldwell, she's also a council woman on the Kauai advisory board, and she did the same analysis on her island, and deaths have gone up every year since 2019. And again, this is not rigorous analysis. These are small islands. Population of Maui is 150,000. But whatever has happened just in the islands of Hawaii, the health response is causing more people to die each year, more so than the previous year. So again, and we're seeing this in other countries as well, especially Australia. I'm going to Australia next week to do an event in Perth, 2,500 people auditorium. It sounds like it's going to sell out. I'm going to show the Australians that their excess deaths in 2022 are about 16%, versus, I think, 4% in 21 and minus 2% in 2020. So whatever they're doing there is causing a rise. And again, had these numbers occurred in 2020, we would have been told about them, but now it's crickets. And if people were unvaccinated and dying suddenly, let's just assume that was going on, I suspect the media would be highlighting that and shouting from the rooftops, but they're not. So this is, I think, the biggest fraud and crime I've ever seen in my financial career. And I think it's probably in your career too. I mean, I used to see a lot of fraud on Wall Street. This is fraud. This is multi-system fraud. This is, pharmaceutical fraud, regulatory fraud, media fraud, healthcare fraud. It's fraud across the board. I've never seen anything quite like it.
Yeah, and you mentioned Jamie Foxx, and rumors have it that he did not want to get the vaccine, but he was pressured from Hollywood or the production company he was working for. And yet that seems to go counter to the Hollywood narrative, which is quite married up with the left-wing narrative, which was the masks and the vax and all of that. And so they can't talk, right? And then in that industry, if you say something against it, I guess you never work. And so it's just this weird silencing thing going on. And then, it's anecdotal, but you look at a guy like Jamie Foxx, I mean, he's a pretty strong guy, right? And it's this weird mystery and no one's saying anything.
This, if you look at him physically, he looks like a very healthy man. I mean, he's a good looking man, fit, low body fat, and all of a sudden he gets a stroke out of nowhere. And it happened within, I think 24 hours of getting a vaccine. Anybody who wants to try to discount that is literally living in fantasy land. And again, I don't like to talk about specific cases. I'm more about the metadata, but this has already been reported by the mainstream media. MSN has put it out on the news. So like even the establishment media is having to report this. This is the interesting thing about this. And I do think that this is slowly getting out there into the consciousness of those who don't pay attention. Those who do pay attention already know what we know, but it's starting to dawn on people something seriously off.
Yeah, again, I challenge anybody to think back in the last 20 years or maybe 40 years of a similar example of a guy in Hollywood with the same fitness level, the same everything level of Jamie Foxx that suddenly got a stroke. I can't think of a single one, I mean, we had Michael Jackson die, but we figured out what that was about. We have sometimes these sudden deaths, but I can't think of anything like this. And, we're seeing a string of these things.
And then we had the Damar Hamlin incident on the football field. Yeah. And he did an interview where, again, I don't want to comment on whether or not he took the vax, but when he was asked about his medical condition, he said, I'd rather not go there. So whatever happened with Damar, it's, and again, I'm an analyst. It seems like someone got to him and gave him a lot of money and he signed an agreement not to talk about it because it's, they asked, what did your doctor say? And he said, I'd rather not talk about that, which is very curious.
Yeah. And again, like how many decades of American football footage do we have? And we've never, ever seen that happen on the field, have we? I mean, no. Never. I mean, never, because I've been watching football since I was a kid. Never seen that, ever.
I think there was one incident in the 50s, but again, not in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's pretty wacky. You mentioned Australia. Talk to me about the data down there, because Australia has always been a massive audience for us at London Real. I found that the people down there, they're always looking ahead. They're always open to new ideas and information, new physical practice, new mental practices. And they usually punch above even the Brits here when it comes to, like I said, new ideas. And yet, during the lockdown, it was really hard to watch how they seemed to be punished by madness and just so many mandates and lockdowns, et cetera. What are you going to tell them when you go down to that stage in Perth? And are they going to want to hear it?
Well, I think the audience is going to be filled, I was told, with obviously some of the red meat crowd, the echo chamber. People already know and believe what we believe. And hopefully, I'd like to see a lot of people who are kind of on the fence and those who think I'm crazy. Because I'm just going to present the facts and the data. And then at the end of my presentation, it's going to be about 30 minutes. I'm going to focus on the US, but at the end, I'm going to show the work our team has done on Australia. I'm going to pose the question to them. Whatever happened in your country, if you don't want to believe that it's the vaccines, whoever was in charge of your health response has hurt you. And you need to investigate this at a bare minimum because your excess deaths have gone up every year since 2020. So your health response is an epic failure and you need to start asking questions. And then I'm going to say, I would hope that your unity in trying to fight COVID and maybe making some errors, I hope that once this information presented, your unity will quickly turn the other way and you'll pull a 180. And I would love to see Australia shame the US, us Yanks, and pull the vaccine before we do. That's going to be my challenge to them. Shame the Yanks.
Good. It's a powerful thing to do. Speaking of governments, we saw a very odd thing that happened in the European Parliament where a few figures went over there, including Dr. Malone, and I think David R. Martin was there, and they were allowed to talk about the epic failure. And I think David R. Martin said he had been there 10 years earlier, warning of the same thing happening. It's also weirdly coincidental because Plandemic 3 airs this weekend, and we actually live streamed the Plandemic 2, which really featured David R. Martin. And again, a lot of facts in that movie. It was almost pure facts. It was just information and data that you could track yourself about different types of research being done in certain places. Just curious for your thoughts on what happened there.
Yeah, so I watched Martin's speech, and it was great. And he's done a lot of,
To continue watching the rest of the episode for free, visit our website londonreal.tv or click the link in the description below.
So Jim Rickards has just recorded a video that's not available to anyone in the public, and he's going to be talking about how this upcoming recession is going to be fast, it's going to be bloody, it's going to be nasty. But at the same time, he's going to show you how you can position yourself to profit from all of this chaos. Now, we've made this video only available to our viewers. Go to londonreal.tv/Jim. Watch that immediately. I can't say enough good things about Jim Rickards. He understands the global economic system better than any guest I've ever had on London Real. His predictions are almost uncannily true, and you can learn how to profit from his vision, from his expertise, and his understanding of economics. So go to londonreal.tv/Jim or click the link below. It's an excellent, excellent look on what's going to happen in the future and how you can position yourself to profit from that. Jim is one of the best in the business, one of my favorite guests on London Real. And he's very, very good at predicting the future and showing us all to profit from it. So click the link, and I hope you enjoy.
The greedy bankers are about to do it again. In 2008, they crashed our financial system and nearly bankrupted the entire global economy. Then they received trillions of dollars in government bailouts. And after, they demanded fat bonuses paid for by you, the taxpayer.
It turns out the banks haven't just been screwing the American taxpayers, they're also screwing over their investors. Turns out the banking industry is the worst place you could put your money, despite enormous taxpayer bailouts.
Now the bankers are back to take away your financial freedom. They lie and tell you that cryptocurrency isn't safe. They try to make it illegal for you to choose how to invest your hard-earned money. They lie and say cryptocurrency is used by money launderers and criminals. But look at the record. It's the banks themselves that launder hundreds of billions of dollars every year to the biggest criminal operations in the world.
Leaked documents have revealed how some UK banks have helped criminals, money launderers and Russians under sanctions.
American authorities discovered that the Sinaloa cartel moved $881 million through HSBC accounts as bank officials turned a blind eye to the illegality.
The bankers lie and say cryptocurrency is not a real investment. Meanwhile, the smartest CEOs in the world are buying billions and billions of it. The truth is that banks lie about cryptocurrency because it makes them scared. The banks take $9 trillion per year of your hard-earned money, and they are worried that they will finally be exposed. They're scared because crypto means they can no longer control your money, which means they can no longer control you. They are scared because you might actually understand your money and intelligently decide what to do with it. Now is the time for us to come together, fight back, and take control. It's time to educate ourselves, our families, and our communities. Because financial education means financial freedom. We know that cryptocurrencies will help us build the new decentralized financial system of the future. A banking system that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. A banking system where access to finance is a fundamental human right. A banking system that is free and fair and welcomes all humans on this earth. The DeFi revolution is happening. We, the people, can no longer be fooled. We choose to take control of our finances. We choose to take control of our freedom. We choose to take control of our future. Join us, and let's take back our financial freedom forever.